organization dedicated to transforming lives through art and education in Southern Nevada. My name is Justin Favela, local artist, self-appointed ambassador for the Las Vegas arts movement. And I just got a tan because I went outside last week. So I'm feeling refreshed and energized and so excited to introduce Zhiwan. Now, if you don't know Zhiwan Cheung, Google Zhiwan. He has made some amazing work. He received his BFA from Cornell University, his MFA from Carnegie Mellon University. Zhiwan first got a taste of performing in front of the camera as a book reviewer for Reading Rainbow, the popular 1990s PBS television show advocating reading for the children. Since then, Zhiwan has continued to probe the intersection of national identity and the personal psyche, focusing on how and where they join and diverge. As an odyssey towards a home that does not exist, a rite of passage with no destination, Zhiwan uses his work to search for critical understanding of an impossible homecoming. Zhiwan also hosts a podcast called Seeing Color. This podcast talks with cultural workers and artists of color in order to expand the area of what is a predominantly white space in the arts. Zhiwan has exhibited work both nationally and internationally in venues such as Nurture Art Gallery in New York, Pika Pika Gallery in Berlin, the Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And more recently, Zhiwan received a Fulbright grant to research the Fluxus Art Group in Berlin, Germany. Currently, Zhiwan is a professor of media arts at the United International College in Zhuhai, China. Zhiwan, thank you for being here. And round of applause, everybody. I know everybody's clapping at home. Yay.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you so much. That was a really wonderful introduction.
Hey, I'm really great at reading scripts. Okay. So just before you start, just to give everybody a little a lay of the land, Zhiwan's going to do an artist presentation of his work. But I just want to give you a little insight on how I know Zhiwan. We met it's actually 4 years ago around this time at a residency in Miami, Florida. That was it was an experience I will never forget. And let's just say that friendships form through trauma as well as joy and happiness. So since then we've kept in touch, and I'm just so happy that you are virtually an artist in resident here at Rogers Art Loft, and I'm so excited to share your work with the rest of our community.
Yeah, thank you so much, Justin, for that great intro, and I'm so happy that you're here to also introduce me. I think, like you mentioned, um, we've known each other for quite some time, and I think I really cherish our friendship, and really happy that like I think I was telling you earlier that I'm always nervous every time I present these things or do these interviews, and it's always nice to have someone who you know and trust, who is on the other side. So again, thank you. And then kind of like what Justin said, I'll be giving this presentation. Justin is free. You're free to join in and ask me questions at any point. And then if anyone has any questions towards the end, or you can in the chat function in Zoom, and I think on Facebook, you can enter your questions, and then these questions will then be read out by Justin, and we can talk a little bit about, your any questions that you may have. So yeah, so without further ado, I'll start the talk. So again, my name is Zhiwan Cheung, and everyone see the screen? Can you see the screen that I'm sharing? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, and so yeah, you can check out my website there, z1.is. My Instagram is at z1chung, and also the podcast, which I'll be talking about in more detail, Seeing Color Pod. I also want to thank everyone at Rogers Art Loft Space for this opportunity. I want to thank Lance, Ryan, Spencer, and everyone who's been working at Rogers Art Loft. And I also want to thank you again, Justin, for joining me in your extremely busy schedule. You just came back from a bunch of traveling, and then you got straight to this Zoom event. I also want to thank my family, especially my parents, who have been supportive in spite of all the difficulty I've given them, and we were just talking about that. Getting my dad to kind of dress up in a tight suit and a Michael Myers mask, which some of you may be seeing in the background of Justin's virtual backgrounds. And I want to thank everyone for tuning into this event, especially during these really strange times. We're all kind of in this gray area of being stuck at home and not stuck at home, and things keep changing. So again, thank you for joining. So kind of framing this talk, something that I've been thinking a lot about, and that also frames my work. It also frames the, foundation of the podcast, which I'll be doing, as part of my project at Rogers Art Loft, is sort of this quote that I got from this curator, Bonaventure Innekung, who's a curator in Berlin. And I saw him talk, and he kind of mentioned once, like, is it possible to talk about madness without having to mention Foucault for once? And, he said this as a sort of, questioning in terms of, where does the foundation of our knowledge come from, right? And how that kind of expands and then indirectly and directly informs how we then understand the world, right? And I think he particularly talked about Foucault because Foucault is famous for talking about structures and the system and institutions and how that forms a knowledge space. And then kind of turn that around and then say, like, do we then need to talk about Foucault, and what is the structure and foundation of knowledge that Foucault has? So that's sort of, I want you to think about as, kind of talking about all these different ideas. And, I guess before we go into the podcast, I want to talk a little bit about my creative process. And, I think about these creative processes as sort of paths in the road that we kind of are on. And I was actually just watching the show Better Call Saul. I'm not sure if anyone watches it, but there's this one part where one of the characters, Mike, tells Saul that, like, we make these decisions in life, and for whatever reason, the decision can make sense, cannot make sense, can be a bad or good decision. It kind of puts us on this path. And so I kind of think of this creative process and the way that I do my work in a similar sort of manner, right? And so, the decisions that I make, the creative choices, it puts me on a path. And uh, sometimes I know what I'm doing, sometimes I don't know what I'm doing, but the path continues to move forward. And these particular pictures were taken actually during my time in Berlin. This was actually right outside the apartment that I was at, and in order for me to kind of go to any other part of the city, I had to pass by this bridge, which was overlooked this particular canal. And so I saw this canal for 6 to 8 months, and every time I would kind of be in awe in it, but also struck by the fact that it's the same view, it's the same canal, but in spite of it being sort of the same thing, um, it would be different, right? And so thinking about the creative process is sort of ever evolving thing, and as much as we would like these decisions to be different, same, um, there's these small nuances that happen, and sometimes the decisions that we make are large decisions, and sometimes they're small. But I think of all of them as collectively leading down some sort of new unknown path. And so kind of, how do we think about this in terms of actual process? How do we think about this actually happening? And so one film, actually the last film that I made, which was in 2019, and I'm working on other films, but this particular film I was having trouble with. And so for this particular project, I had actually bought a Nixon mask, somewhere in Illinois a few years ago. And then I eventually brought it with me to Washington State, and I filmed myself in this mask, and they didn't actually know what to do with it. And so I thought of, the choice of picking this Nixon mask, the choice of filming in Washington State as a sort of creative decision that put me down a certain path. And so right now, here's a brief excerpt. This is a 3-minute excerpt of the video, and you get a kind of get a sense of what ended up happening to it. And I'll talk more about the decisions that ended up affecting and creating this piece. So let's play this video.
Hey, Zhiwan, I think you have to stop sharing your scored
Okay.
screen.
Okay.
Stop sharing your scored screen.
Nixon visited China in 1972 for 7 days. 24 years of silence ended that day between two countries, one at its peak, the other still becoming. And for what purpose? Is performing the same as embodying a sense of self? If I perform as Nixon, will I understand China better? In wearing his skin, can I better comprehend our situation? This past that the history of such an imbalance of power is impossible. bunch of white critics who were like, we don't really get it. And Simone Lee kind of wrote this interesting Instagram post kind of saying, as a response to all these art critics. And, I'll read a little bit of it. You can kind of find the longer post.